Absolutely fantastic to see you all here today and welcome. This is for everyone wanting to apply for IAPT grants. What we're going to be talking about is something quite general. So hopefully the skills you'll be learning kind of equipped you in some ways for general writing in science and especially for grants and proposals. Um, so in short, the aim is to discuss how to apply for these IAPT grants. And we have two grants that we will be going through that are currently open for calls in IAPT grants program. We will go through the basic guidance of how to plan it, how we would guide the process to be, and what steps to include, and what common mistakes to avoid. So by the end of today, it's roughly 1.5 hours, so book that time in your mind. You'll feel more equipped to write in a clearer, more focused manner and more in detail. As you will see, certain things, certain messages will repeat throughout, and one is add some detail. And so that your proposal would get to that awarded pile. So of course the skills will be general, but we will really want you to succeed in applying for these grants for IAPT. So let's start with the introductions. I'm Tina Saakinen. I run the IAPT grants program and the committee together with Blanca Leon, who sadly won't be here today. She's based in Peru, and time zone means that for her it is in the middle of the night. There are 13 other members in that committee, and together with that panel, we review all these proposals. So we're in a great place to give advice of what common mistakes to avoid, how to make your proposal to stand out. So often they're extremely competitive, so even though you're good, you may not get to that top list of candidates who are awarded. Um, and and it's great to be having voices from different parts and hearing different perspectives, how to make your grants better. So today, Vinita and Rocio will be providing that too. So I will pass now the introduction to Rocio, and after that to Vinita, just to mention your role in IAPT, your speciality, and where you're based and where you're from.
Thanks, Tina. I'm Rocio Diana, so I'm the current chair of the Communications Committee, but I'm also part of the Grants Committee reviewing grants. And I'm from Argentina, but I'm currently based and working at the University of Helsinki on evolution and systematics of the Solanaceae family, the nightshades.
Hi, I'm Vinita Gowda. I've been involved in the IAPT grants committee and have been part of the review committee. And I'm based in a central university right in the center of India called Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research. My group primarily focuses on plant systematics on different plant families, but we specialize with gingers. And we work pretty much in India and in also a few countries in Asia. So it's more a pan-Asian phylogenies that we're looking at.
Thanks so much. Later, we will also have James Boatwright to join us from South Africa. And he's in the same position. He's reviewing grants for IAPT. He's also in charge of organizing the next IBC, which is a fantastic challenge. So I always hear all that stress that's already taking place 6 years before the event. So thanks for those introductions. Now, we would like to hear about you. So we'd like to understand your background, who's attending. So Rocio, as you registered, Rocio has gathered some information. So I'll pass my talking stick to Rocio to hear about where are you coming from.
Well, we are very glad to have you all here because and we have received 93 registrations for this webinar so far. And all these registrations come from 25 different countries from across all the continents except Antarctica. So we have a great representation here across all these webinars. One took place yesterday, now today, and we have two other webinars in January. So the most common registration for this webinar were from Brazil, but also India, And in the third and fourth place, it's Argentina and Colombia. Some of the comments that we have received is about your interests, about the small collection grants as well as the research grants, but other interests about writing proposals, how to improve that, also capacity building, and how to improve your writing in a more properly sense, like in manuscripts and other funding proposals. So we welcome everyone. It's great to have you here and encourage you to apply for these grants.
Fantastic. So we also have some questions. So we're going to do this as a poll to get to know more about you and your experience in terms of language, which is obviously one step to get to these proposals, as everything is in English. And we fully understand that most of scientists in this world are not native speakers of English. None of us are, me neither. So I have started in Finland with a language that's nothing to do with Indo-European languages and learned English as I now am based in Scotland. So Rocio is going to do a poll and your screen might pop with a question. So we'd like to start hearing more details about you. Please do answer as they come to your screen. So the first question is about the region where you're based, just to get that continental understanding of who's in this meeting, so you'd know your colleagues. And then we'll start asking about your language background. There might be native speakers, fantastic. Use your cohorts to then reach out, get comments. We need to work as a collaborative team. And also whether you've applied for IAPT grants before. If you did, were you successful? Do we have successful IAPT grant holders in our audience? So that again, you'd have a chance to reach out and ask experiences, and you might want to voice those experiences during this meeting. We'd like to hear either in the chat box, or you can open your microphone, raise your hand, and we'd love to pass the talking stick to you. And what grants will you be planning to apply? Is it small collection grants, or is it research grants, or is it both? And anything particular, and this is a more open-ended question, that you're wanting to learn today, that you're expecting to hear and you're wanting to ask? Do mention that in the chat box.
Tina, and in the meantime, while everyone is responding this poll, we can give the introductions of Stephen and Gustavo, that they are already here.
Oh, fantastic. So we mentioned Stephen Boatwright already. So I'm going to pass first to Stephen Boatwright and then to Gustavo Shimizu, who's joining us from Brazil. So Stephen, would you be happy to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes. Good morning. I'm Stephen Boatwright from Western Cape, based at the University of Western Cape. I'm an IAPT counselor serving on the nomenclature committee, but I've reviewed grants before for this program. I'm a systematist working on taxonomy of legumes, Asteraceae, Asphodelaceae, and Thymelaceae.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stephen, for joining us. And then Gustavo?
Hi, greetings to all. I'm a systematist also on the families Vokizaceae and Hypericaceae, and in Brazil, in Campinas, São Paulo State, and I'm working on the grants committee, reviewing the research grants, and also on the communications committee, working with Rocio and other fellows, and I will be very happy to help on this workshop also.
Great, thanks, Gustavo. And now, how are the polls looking? Do we have results?
Yes, but I won't end the poll until the end of the meeting, so you have the chance to continue adding your replies. So far, we have 14 participants, and the greatest representation is from Asia. And of course, some small representations from South America, Central America, Africa, North America, and Europe. But more than the 50% of the people here are from Asia. Native language, well, there is most of the people, the 80%, they don't have English as their native English. And as Jean and me, we are in the same position as well. And there are 3 people who have already applied to the IAPT grants. So that's great to have that representation also about like people who has been successful, who has applied and has been successful. There is one person who had that application successful, and other people haven't had these successful applications. Then the 5th question was about what type of grants are you planning to apply? And most of people, the 73% is on research grants. So most of them, and we'll can discuss later about this, what I wanted to learn today, because I cannot read it until I end the poll.
Understood.
So, yeah, we can compare that at the end, I think.
Absolutely. And if something, one of those items that you have entered and you're thinking about that you want to learn, and that topic gets mentioned and you have more questions, do raise your hand, open your microphone and just step in. We really appreciate that. And also use the chat box. If you're shyer with English, it's very okay to put it in the chat box and we can help. And we can try to support other languages, use translators just to get communication going. So now we're going to start with a presentation. So hopefully you'll see on your screens, and I'm going to put a laser pointer just to make sure you're seeing the lovely presentation. So we're going to talk about the generalities, but we're also going to introduce these 2 specific grants we have open right now for IAPT this coming year. And they have deadlines. The research grants, RG in short, in some slides you'll see this mentioned. The deadline, the applications are closing on 30th of January. The small collection grants, SCG, in other words, are closing on 28th of February. So at the end of January and end of February, we have 2 deadlines. There are generalities to preparing a good grant proposal and writing it, and I'm just going to start overviewing that now. The first, here I've done it kind of visually. I'm a very visual person, so just to see there's many steps. It's not just one blob thinking in your to-do list, write a proposal. I would like to break it down and talk about these different steps to really make you understand what steps in what parts in each would help you to make it more fun and make it better, the proposal at the end. The first 4 are very much to do with developing it. And the last 2, and very important, as highlighted with the color, is refining it, making it better. I call it bettering in a very American way. So let's then see the detail of each. Here it is in a bullet point format. So for those who are not visual learners and who want a good bullet point list, this would be it, but very short. We'll start getting into the detail. So first, read the grant announcement very carefully. Read, are you eligible to apply? Can I apply? Is it for me? Is this grant for me? What does it enable to do? What is it for? What are the people looking for? So that you make your proposal that you'll develop match what has been asked. Because if those 2 don't match, there's less chance you get a successful application. Obviously, your project can be amazing, but if it doesn't match, the chances are less. Then start developing that idea that you have had to match. So this process is very much circular. It's a bit of a kind of feedback loop. Start thinking about the budget and the objectives, and I'll have another kind of detail on this. Then start thinking about the team. Who are you going to work with? Who are you going to interact with? Name all of them in your proposal. Don't forget to name them. Maybe you make new connections. Maybe you're going to do a research visit. Be proud and explain that. That's what, especially in the IAPT grants, we're looking for. Then make the written form, make the first full draft. Then start making sure that you've hit all the points that they've asked in the actual grant announcement. So this is again feedbacking back, that checking that you hit all the points, and get comments, get feedback from your peers, your fellow students, fellow technicians if you're working somewhere, fellow PhD students, fellow colleagues if you're a lecturer, or your supervisors, your mentors, people you can reach out to. These can be anywhere, as we are in a global world. So now let's go back to the visual representation and start breaking these parts down and thinking about them more in detail. So if we think about the actual first step is the grant call, looking at the details on our website, and I'm now going to just pull out our website and show something magical. And this is about looking for previous examples, right? On our website, which you can see on the screen right now, you go to the grants, general overview, you get an overview of these two grant programs, and here you see previously awarded grants under both research and small collection grants. Look at them, learn about them. What has been successful in the past in terms of what type of projects could be proposed? Perhaps you get ideas what you could do, what fits in your situation with your objectives. There's a lot to learn from previous success cases, right? But never limit it just to that. Obviously, you are your own master of your own ideas, but it's really helpful to see what type, what scale of things might be appropriate for the given grant call, because these are, in IAPT case, relatively small budgets. We're talking about $2,000 per applicant in both research grants and small collections. So then if we go to the second step of starting to develop your idea. So you've learned what should be applied, like roughly like what kind of things are asked appropriate for this grant call. What about your idea? And at this step, you really want to start sketching things in bullet points or on a paper. Many people think better if they sit with a piece of paper and just think, or talking to somebody. So do use those skills. I myself, I'm very like that. I need somebody to bounce ideas or to start making little drafts. And this is where you start needing to think about objectives, budget, and timeline. And these kind of three items, they interact with each other. And Stephen pointed this yesterday, Stephen, so you'll smile now when I added this kind of visual representation of these three. Objectives is kind of a bullet point short way of expressing what you will do and how you achieve it and what the output is. You can do it in that kind of way. But that is affected by your budget, because you cannot ask to do, you can't be saying you're going to conquer the world with $2,000. You need to make the objective something very specific, detailed, realistic, that you can reach within this budget, given the timeline of a year. So you need to think these in relationship to each other. So you might first list objectives that are quite grandiose, maybe often quite large. We see this often. But then if you do the kind of development of the project before you actually submit your proposal, you might realize that when you develop the budget, it might be too little for the given objectives. You then go back to your objectives, refine them. And then when you do your timeline, how you're going to do all this work, you realize yet again that, oh, given the time, I might not make all these objectives. So let's refine them again. So it's this feedback loop. So it's really useful to think these three important items that go into your proposal. And this is very similar to any proposal, whether it's research or the small collections. So then we come to the third step, which is the team. So this is really broad, think it broadly. Who will I interact? You may be the main applicant. There might not be anybody else involved, but you may interact with somebody. Mention them and explain who they are, what's their position, what will they contribute, what will you learn from them, what will they learn from you. And here, the things to think about is who will you interact, new collaborations, There's nothing more than new collaborations, establishing those connections you may already hold, but making them more deeper would be something both research grants and the IAPT Small Collection grants really appreciates, whether this is within your country, within your region, or maybe internationally, really a far distance collaboration. Collecting permits was something we mentioned yesterday. Many proposals involve collecting organisms, whether these are fossils or whether they are plants or whether they are fungi. For every collection, you do need a permit. If there happens to be magically a country where you don't need an official permit, then you still would need to mention those details of how this happens in the given country you'll be working in, and whether you have the permits, whether you will apply them, how long it takes, will they cost, who do you need to help you to get these permits. We'd like to see those details in these proposals. So then, at this point, you be very close to being able to do a full first draft. And this is where we would emphasize that think about detail, detail, detail. It's often that we receive proposals that are that could be enhanced by adding detail. And we'll see this in our examples. So start thinking detail of when would you do this, who would do this, how many, think about numbers. Think about percentages. Think about some way of mentioning, if you're thinking of digitizing, what will you digitize? Will you digitize the label data, or then will you also take a photo? If you do take a photo, what resolution photo? As an example, right? And it's good to think of it broadly. So when we mention examples during this workshop, and it seems something to do with herbarium specimens, do think it relevant for the research grant proposals too, because these are general concepts we're teaching. So then if we go to the fifth step, this is really, does number one, the grant call, equal what you've now got? Is everything they're asking here for you to submit ready? Is it mentioned? Is it mentioned in the way they like? Is it clear? The best way of making the best way of bettering your proposal is to make sure these things match, that you use the terms asked here. If they ask you to give a timeline, call it a timeline, and so on, and express it clearly. Use figures. If you haven't used a single figure, think very carefully, is there something you could express really nicely in a concise figure? Whether it's the workflow, whether it's the method you use, whether it's the organism you study, it really helps for the reviewer to get an understanding in a short moment of what you're aiming at and the detail involved. In a picture, you can often add a lot of detail or the general overview without having to use a lot of words to describe. And then lastly, the most important step that often people end up skipping because of lack of time, and it is feedback. And that's something we are trying to encourage with these workshops, because you get a chance here to start thinking about that yourself, for yourself, the feedback, because you're hearing different ways of approaching, but also use this feedback by sending it to your peers to get ideas how to make it better. And this is really often the difference between a good and an excellent proposal. So now I would like to invite all the other members here from the IAPT councils to express their thoughts about this process. Do you have something to emphasize in these 6 steps? We had great discussions yesterday, and just to reflect on that, what would you emphasize for people preparing their proposals?
I will add 2 main ideas actually. The first one is about how you are approaching your goals and your objectives in this proposal. That is very important that you have a clear picture of which is the background, what you know about the topic, about the things that you need to, like the things that you already have, like all the resources you already have, the knowledge, the background. and also about the needs. Which are the gaps? What do you need to make your research successful? What is this funding needed? What other funding you have and will be complemented with this funding? And the second idea is mostly about the revision and feedback steps, the last two, because in previous calls we were requesting recommendation or supporting letters to be together with the proposal, at least two. And now we are not longer requesting that. So you can take advantage of that, and instead of asking that recommendation letter, ask these same people to revise your proposal, to obtain some feedback, to improve it. So this is some extra step that is quite important to make your proposal better.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Rosia. When you spoke about that need, what came to my mind, I always think practically, how do you translate that? In an example of research grant, it would be what's known about the organism already, and then what's not known to show that what is known and where's the gap. But in the case of small collection grants, it might be how many specimens does that collection hold? How many of them have been, let's say, curated, and how many of them haven't been, or digitized, or scanned, whatever you're aiming to do, to give a proportion, an understanding of what is this grant going to target, what is the gap. So remember to give that context. That is often lacking. You'll think that's, how can that be? You're the closest to that context. You are the person to explain that, but it's often forgotten, especially in the small collection grants. I would emphasize that context of what is known about the collections, what stage is it, and what remains to be done. Nice. Any other views?
Yeah, Tina. So I agree with the points given. I kind of also want to emphasize for those who are applying for the research grant that I think you may also want to think about, first of all, give yourself time. Nothing is going to be done quickly. So if you discovered while you're preparing right now, if you thought 7 days was sufficient for you to go through the 6 steps, it's not practical. Let's be clear. And I think when we read the grant, that rushed nature is kind of visible to us. So I think give yourself sufficient time, especially if you are doing it for the first time. But I also think of the scale. It's okay for you to think of a very big question, but then ask money for only part A, which serves that big question. So it's not required that your entire grant, is centered around something that's going to deliver everything in it. You can say, this is my big question, and I'm going to only ask money for this part A. And since it is IAPT grant, you may want to emphasize on the taxonomy part at some point, So you cannot be emphasizing on genomic thing. We all do genomic work, not to complain about it, but I think we're looking for how the taxonomy part is coming out. So let's say if you did something, for example, on using genomics to look at species complexes, something which is a very small but doable because you're only going to sequence, let's say, 6 species, right? So those kind of problems seems doable even if you use the word genomics. But if you say you're going to do genomics for 100 species, in 1 year, we know that may not be very feasible. So it looks a little not so practical unless you've already showing that you have preliminary data to it. So think of the scale as well, that you can ask big questions. But if you're asking a very big question, make sure that you're asking very clear about which part of that big question you're asking money for in the grant, so that it's clear to the reviewers that this is where you're going. You have a big question in mind, and IAPT is supporting that first phase or second phase, or maybe the last phase of the entire project that you're proposing. And that will help us understand, or the reviewers, all of the reviewers understand where you're going. And the reviewers are extremely heterogeneous. So please do not think that we have any commonality other than the fact that we all like work on plants and we like plants.
And very planty in sensu lato, right? Because we are including fungi and
Yes.
and fossils are in here. So yeah, they're not anymore even green. That's right. I love that point, Vinita. Yesterday, Stephen said it in a nice way of you're asking money, you're asking money from IAPT, and you're asking a certain sum. In general, whenever you ask for money, people will say, what will you do with it? What will that exact sum help you to do? What will be the output? Think it that way. Think about trying to answer a person. I know you're writing it to this cloud. We are the people, so that helps already breaking these barriers. And try to think, how will I explain? What will this money do? Like Vinita said, not the whole project. Nice to give the setting, but try to give in your objectives. What will this particular set of money do? I really like that. Very important and often forgotten. Let us emphasize that in the research grants. Other points or further comments on that?
I just have one more point for people who are applying and may not succeed, if that is okay to discuss as well here, is that it's okay for you to apply again. Just
Absolutely.
because you've been rejected once doesn't mean IAPT will remember you, and that's not the point anyways. The point is that you also take this entire grant exercise as an experience and you improve upon it. I have had students who've been successful in the third time and the fourth time. And so it doesn't matter. I think it's, and I have also had students who've given up after two attempts. So I think you may want to put yourself in that perspective that it's okay to try again. And I think every year, sometimes the emphasis is different. It could be any reason, or it could be that the competition was very high. So just because you didn't get it once doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply again. So please try again and improve upon the project if it was not done, and just resubmit it. That's
And
perfectly.
the good news is you will get some feedback. The reviewers provide you feedback, how they judged your in relation to the other proposals. So use that feedback. Try to think. It can feel quite demotivating when you get feedback. Yeah, really, they didn't understand my objectives. I wrote them clearly. They would have read them. What they may mean by that is that it's not clear what the money will give in relation to the larger objectives, things like that. So try to think, what could they have meant? Or could I improve explaining it if it really was unclear, right? So give them a chance that they could have a point in their feedback. We're really trying to give a constructive feedback so that people will get those grants on next time. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a really good point. This is for those two. Any other? There will be a chance to come back to this. We will now move on to describing the small collection grants in detail and then the research grants. And many topics come specifically to these specific calls in those and in the examples again. So there will be time. So maybe in the interest of time, we'll move on. But as we get to those details, do raise your hands to raise more important points and emphasis. So now, before I pass to Vinita to introduce the details of the small collection grants, I will give just context of why IAPT has specific focus on small herbaria or small collections. So these could be fossil collections, these could be slide collections. And it is very nicely shown or visualized by these wonderful papers coming out expressing the contribution, and I would say this is absolutely disproportionate contribution of small collections to our understanding of plants, sensu lato, diversity in this world, their distribution. And that is because many of these small collections are not in global repositories, databases, in other words, digitally available. And it is because they're small, they're often under-resourced, and we would like to change that in some way, to give these small collections a voice and empower them to at least start enabling them to be more available and be in a better condition. help them and motivate them, because there's a large global community of herbaria and collections that they all belong to. And so with these words, over to Vinita to introduce these grants.
All right, so the small collections grants is very interesting and quite unique in the sense that it's just like what Tina said, it's supposed to support a herbarium which already exists. So you have to have, there are certain requirements, and we'll get to in the next slides, but the aim is to support and enhance the small collections. And so the first requirement is that the herbarium should be included already in the index herbarium, which means that you already have your code, which has been given, and so you have a herbarium code to it, and you have already documented somewhere what are the total number or expected or sort of estimate of collections that you have had in the past few years, and how many of them are curated, and so on and so forth. So the aim is also to support, it's quite diverse, so anything to do with the herbarium, which includes digitizing the collections, and we'll get to what equipments you can also possibly cover. Remember, the money is not very big, so it's not like you can get big equipments, but there are small things like the reader, like a barcode reader, or even something like if you just want stickers for your labels or very small things, you can still get those things as part of the collection. So you can ask for digitizing your collection. You can ask for money to process the specimen backlogs that you've had. You can ask money for shipping endangered collections to other herbaria, or even receiving, if you're receiving collections from other herbaria. You can ask money for conserving already specimens that you have. At least in India, for instance, we often need to replace dehumidifiers quite often, because in the monsoon it's a major chaotic situation in small herbaria. So oftentimes conserving current specimens requires that the dehumidifier just needs to be repaired, and that money is often quite sparse. So you could come up with anything to which you can justify for conservation of current specimens. And finally, mounting important collections. Now, depending on which country you are in, at least I think that people who are mounting should be paid for it. So while you may use students to teach and they may mount collections, oftentimes it's probably a good idea to request for some funds to give as honorarium for people who would mount the collections for you. It can be part of your training process or whatever, however you want to pitch it, but mounting is also a very important part of this collections grant.
And just to say, obviously, it can be a combination of these things, and that can be seen positively because you're trying to combine things to make it more attractive to the person working, that it's not repetitive. It's not just digitizing. Let's say that in this modern time, we think digitizing is all, but you can combine in a very fun way of enhancing the collections in different ways.
And there's a budget in one of the slides which will give you an idea of how you can distribute all your funds, right? So just like in the research grant, you can ask for molecular work and field work. Similarly, you can do the same thing. You can sort of distribute it across different infrastructure, curatorial improvements, and terms of the loan. So postage is big money actually. Field work, of course, again, it won't cover a lot depending on which country you are in. It can actually be substantial. So if you look at the budget, be careful about it, and that will give you an idea. So the things to focus on here is same sort of advice as for the research grant. Do give context to your collection. There were a few grants I remember where it was very clearly said that their strength was the algal collection, or their strength was bryophytes, and that sort of put many of us who were reviewing it in context, and we were not comparing it. And so there's collections were different, the requirements were different, their needs and emphasis for how they're going to preserve it was very different. So I think that context is very important. And of course, you may be a collector for, or your herbarium may be collecting everything, in which case still find that context for which you're asking this funds for. Identify the small enough products that can be delivered within a year. So again, you're not building a herbarium using these funds. You're kind of saying, what can you do with IAPT funds in 1 year? And sometimes that extends to 2 years. So you may buy sort of, let's say, resources, and you may continue to mount till the 2nd year. That's okay. But I think still you may want to have a goal for that 1 year time period for the herbarium. Provide a detail to the database you will use and data you will digitize if that's part of what you're requiring or requesting the money for. And the database, again, hopefully is some kind of a database of all the collections that you have, and some kind of numbers and tables would help put this in context. You definitely discuss the collaborative work, because herbarias really don't work in isolation. And also of what is your status, if you have any permit requirements, if you're asking for field work, it is important to show that you have the collection permit. And therefore, what you're going to deposit in the herbarium is going to be under legal collection. It would help to emphasize that part. How during collections and how the fund is also going to help train people, either it could be something as simple as mounting. You could bring school kids, to show the herbaria and show the collections, and also how you're going to show some kind of an engagement, either with forestries, scientific, academic, social, whatever it may be. So I think it would really be useful to think of it, and I don't think we're looking for long paragraphs. But the fact that you thought about it is very, very important. At least 1 or 2 sentences would be useful, because if you don't mention it, the way we read the review or we review it is that you didn't think about it, and it's not very clear to us whether you had it in your mind or you truly did not. You chose not to include it, or you actually never thought about it. It's very hard for us to judge. So unfortunately, the reviewers are going to think that you didn't think about it, and even though you may actually have consciously chosen to not include it. So make sure you include these parts, because engagement, training, and collaboration is very important. You can also request for funds to send duplicates out. So that's the postage funds. And then explain your overall impact. That is, where are you going to put it on your database, or you're just building a database? Is it going to be accessible to others? Is there a website available? And it's not necessary every herbaria, small herbaria, has a website, because website management itself is quite a task. But so it's not required that you have a website, but it's important for you to show that the database is going to be available publicly, because this is public funds that you're receiving, and therefore some kind of database needs to also be made available through the IAPT grant.
We had fantastic points made yesterday by Stephen that think about, or perhaps it was, I'm now saying Stephen, but might have been another person, or in as a group discussion, that it's important to think that the data is available to others. Your own website is the least efficient way of doing that. Mm-hmm. So do consider contributing to existing data repositories. Let it be cheapy, let it be a regional or national project, something like that. Because you maintaining your own website, online database, is long-term an expensive and time-consuming task. So absolutely fantastic point. This is, perhaps we should cross it and put a question mark, an existing repository. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And okay, so what you will need if you're applying for the SCG is you are expected to have this IAPT membership that kind of helps you apply for the grants. a very clear budget. And again, in the next slide, you'll see the full hand. There it is. The budget, I mean, I think it's good to have a detailed budget because it also tells us, will tell to all the reviewers that you've thought about the fine details. And I think it will really help you also write your grant better. So I think it goes both ways. The minute
it's
you
that
write the
feedback
budget,
loop, right?
yeah, it feedbacks into your writing, and it goes back and forth. And the proposal is 2 pages max, which includes objectives, plan, and a timetable. For instance, let's say if you're saying you're going to buy, even if you're buying equipments, I think in some countries it may take a very long time. So the minute the funds are received, it may still take you 3 months to get it because you're shipping it from overseas. So all those features, just add it in, because especially small research grants. I mean, there are also from developed countries who apply for these. But if you're from a global south country, it's okay for you to openly say that shipping will take 6 months, because you could be in a small island and it will take time for you to resource that, even if it's something like a barcode reader. So, but clearly mention it so that the reviewers understand the constraints that you're working under. And it shouldn't come out as that we gave the money and then nothing happened, but because you may actually have been stuck in some kind of a local constraint. And there's CV, which should be 3 pages max, in which you highlight your strength in taxonomy and your background of why you're the herbarium collector, and publications and previous grants and so on and so forth. All right. Anything did I miss, Katina?
No, not to my knowledge, but let's open the floor. So here is the detail of that budget template available as you apply. There's an option to download the budget template. This is how it looks. Everything is in USD. So if you have a local currency, as you will, you could make, for example, another column for that, and then just make sure you translate the amount with the most appropriate conversion rate in USD for the application. Yeah. What we need to see is the USD equivalent. Any comments from our fellow IAPTs in terms of advice on specific to small collection grants? I will then move. Thank you so much, Vinita. Yeah. Was somebody starting?
Sorry. Yeah,
Please.
Oh, yes, it's me. It's Abubakar.
Oh,
well, for
fantastic,
the
Abu. I will let you introduce yourself.
maybe
Abu is joining us as a kind of course leader here. So please introduce yourself. We weren't sure whether you have a chance of joining. You're in the field at the moment.
oh, yes. My name is Abubakar Bello, and I am working with Umaru Musa Yar'Adua University, Katsina. I'm a taxonomist, but currently I'm working with IDIF, that is German Center for Integrated Biodiversity, and the University of Leipzig. So I wanted to just add that an applicant might have other things to consider in his budget, not necessarily buying camera, not necessarily buying those items that I mentioned, the barcode, the microscopy. If you have anything that you think this grant can be used for, I think you can also include it, and then the reviewers might see if these things can be funded, and then you might get it. That is just what I wanted to add. I just wanted to say that this is just like an example.
Absolutely good point, right? So these are examples of items you may want to include. That does not mean every application has to have camera included, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. So here, an example, other items, please just specify and make it yours. So you could change these items. You would say camera, and you would specify what kind of camera if you're buying a camera, the details. You would say, I want to get an SD card, a memory card. I want to buy a particular kind of barcode stickers. You would write here barcode stickers, right? You can totally modify these items to be specific and appropriate for your proposal, right?
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely good point.
If you don't want, you could also have other things other than digitization, for example,
Yes.
and then you can include this in your proposals.
Thank you, Abu, and welcome joining. Thanks for joining us. It's hard with everything going on. I saw a question online, and this relates to can two people apply for their small collection grant as a team? And my advice there is that do follow the instructions online. So again, if you have a question like this, you would go online on the website, and it states that you have to be the curator or manager of that collection, that herbarium, that institute, that collection, herbarium, to apply. And this is obviously so that the herbarium, in terms of its directorship, knows that it's something's being proposed to be done there. So you cannot apply for small collection grant unless you're linked to the directorship to that level. The answer is yes, as long as that main applicant who submits the proposal is the curator manager or in that administrative in charge position. So great question to raise. Was there another question there from Mateus? I would like to understand more about the products. Would they be scientific articles, workshops, or participation in events? So this is specific to the small collection grants, I'm assuming, Mateus. So I'm going to answer specific to small collection grants. It's a very, really, really good question. I would say they can be humbly, an output would be 200 specimens conserved, and express it maybe in a percentage. 200 of 1,000 very old specimens conserved of this herbarium. And you would explain why these needed to be conserved. So express it like extremely valuable, globally important type collections were conserved and digitized. That is an output. And the data was submitted to global chase store plants or GBIF or the regional hub, something like that. Or there was a paper, fantastic if there's a paper coming out of it. Small collection grants, paper isn't a usual, a publication isn't a usual output. It can be simply the number of specimens enhanced, or imagine that you've enhanced those 200 specimens and you shipped duplicates of those to other herbaria, which obviously secures that collection event, because if something would happen to that herbaria, but also it distributes that chance of people visiting, because then the same collection event is available across herbaria. So think it very open-mindedly what the output is for these small collection grants, and be specific. Be proud of the small, humble, but useful, important contribution, what the output can be. We don't exaggerate that it's something that it's not, but remember to be specific and give that detail so we can understand it. Any other comments on the outputs or products? I will now move to the research grant in that case. And here we're focused on research. So it's a slightly different way of thinking. So we're really thinking about a research contribution output project. And this can involve travel to other institutions. So it can be to visit an expert, to make a new connection, to learn from an expert, to share your expertise, to teach that to somebody else. And obviously, herbarium visit, collection visit to study specimens is one way of doing this. Laboratory work. So that could be that you visit to another institution to do the laboratory work, as an example, or you do laboratory work where you're based, and that can be chromosome studies, it can be floral dissections, it can be molecular, it can be any kind of laboratory work. Many are collection visits to study those specimens, and many do include fieldwork. And that can be traveling to another institution, visiting that herbaria in that institution, and doing fieldwork around it to make it cost effective. So combining different aspects, again, I would say is highly encouraged because it's cost effective often, and making those connections to other experts, making new connections is seen positively, because this is about building your career and having a chance to travel to new places to learn more about your study group, but also about scientists working in that field. So here's that said in a slightly different way, that we particularly encourage travel to visit major herbaria, major collections relevant to your study group, wherever these are. Interactions with specialists to build taxonomic linkage, generate future ideas for work, and build that taxonomic capacity. So again, this is IAPT, taxonomy is at the core, just like Benita said, even in the research grants. Think about who you're asking that $2,000, and think how taxonomy is at the core.
Tina, I would also like to add that we particularly encourage students and also from middle to low income countries.
That's right. So there is like you get points from the background of what funds are available to you is considered in these. There's a positive bias. Let's put it that way.
Also, Tina, can you also discuss that, let's say major herbaria, unfortunately, most of them are in the global north, and that travel is not possible to cover if you're going from Asia to, let's say, Q. We know that $2,000 will not help you. So while it may be required, I think you may want to be practical about it. So you have to think of trying not to propose those kind of trips unless there's a matching fund available.
Yeah.
And if there's matching funds from your institution or from some other grant, then you have to show that that is available, and that's where these funds are going to be used. Otherwise, in all the global north, unfortunately, all those areas will cost you at least $5,000.
That's a really good point. I felt bad in even reading the word major. I feel like that's not a nice way of saying what we're meaning. What we're meaning is, think about it, if you're studying, I'm such a South American biased person, but in terms of ecosystem, Amazon covers many countries. If you're studying Peruvian Amazonian plant groups and you're based in Peru, your major herbarium would be perhaps Manaus in Brazil, or in Rio de Janeiro, where there are many collections nationally gathered across Brazil. So think that as your major. That's what I mean. So think about beyond your country, beyond what you have been to so far. Making that new connection, expanding one step further. And like Benita said, it will not be old historical collections in Global North, but is that so important when you are likely to get at least a digital loan from those countries, and you could work during your project with a Global North expert that facilitates study of those organisms whilst you're working intensely in Global South, as an example. So really important perspective, what is a major herbarium? But I think we also need to change our concept of what is a major herbarium, because I see often people focus on their country and Global North major herbaria, old historical colonial herbaria, but actually in a modern time, our major herbarium might be in a neighboring country within that region, within that continent. Or there might be at least very fruitful discoveries if you go to those herbaria. You might find extent distributions, find new synonymy, and so on. So again, repeating similar points to small. Oh, Benita, yes, please.
For students who are here, or researchers who have not done this before, if you're not aware of it, what I'm going to say is only useful then, is that some of the major herbaria will share DNA tissue with you for which they charge. Now that is a cost that you can include in these research grants. And that would be very smart for you to think about it. And so this is again why I'm saying that if you have planned it and you know why you're applying for, you would include those whatever 20 pounds or 10 pounds, whatever it is. You can include that, and that can actually help you. So you don't have to go, but in some sense you are getting tissues from this major herbaria. So be smart in, still reaching out to the global north and seeing where the charges are there, and that could be still part of your research grant.
Thanks. So the things to focus on and common mistakes to avoid are very similar to the small grants. But just to be specific to research grants, the things we see is providing context is omitted. You're not really giving us a chance of understanding the nature of the system, what is known, what is not known, and what of that gap of what is not known, which part particularly will you answer and contribute and give an output for with this given IAPT grant. Not about the entire project of often a PhD, no, the context of this grant. Yeah, so that is often omitted. The specific objectives for this grant are not there. Let's put it that way. And identify small enough products or small enough objectives that can be delivered within a year. Maximize the collaboration and making new connections. And this is in country, across neighboring countries or the region, globally, so at every level. And obviously, this being IAPT, which is a global organization, wanting to give global funding that isn't available, that can be used across nations, we would really want to see that regional new connections or strengthening connections and or globally, whatever is relevant for your project. National funding, obviously, we hope could be more in making connections within country, but obviously we'll consider all of it. But I just want to emphasize that obviously anything that goes beyond, like broader, is good. Explain the products and impact clearly. Say what you're aiming for. And again, be realistic with that given money. These don't have to be large outputs. They can be identification guides, data sets, and so forth. The documents needed are very similar. Again, to the small collection grants. Here is the budget template, very similar again, with these ideas of what your items may be. So again, you modify these as you need to and specify them with giving details of travel costs to between Lima and another city by bus, and then you give the little price between those places, 2 tickets, and then you give the total price here in USD. So please use these spaces to give that detail because you have space. So in here, you have space to add that detail of what those items consist for you. You do need to be a member. So you need the IAPT membership, you need the budget, you need the proposal, that's 3 pages max. And you need a CV that again is 3 pages max. And just like for the small collection grants, everything, all of these attachments should be submitted as PDFs. So do not ignore that advice online. And I'm repeating it here because we do see mistakes in this. You submit it as an Excel, it's not visualized correctly when we see it as reviewers, and who suffers? Well, we suffer because we feel the sadness of the information not coming across the right way. So save it as a PDF to make sure that we see in the format you've submitted. Yeah.
Ina, something to mention about the CV is that remember that there is a taxonomic approach in this proposal. So try to adapt your CV to that and includes more about your experience in field trips, the herbaria you have revised previously, also the amount of collections that you have made. And there are some tools or web page to help you to do that actually. For example, the Bionomia, I'm pasting the link here, can give you a profile if you include your data there about all the identifications you have performed across different herbaria, also collections, and how many of your specimens or identifications have been used in different articles. So it's a great resource. You can include that in your CV and it's going to be like more powerful.
That's a fantastic point. I really like seeing taxonomists being proud of their outputs, which are not always papers, they're specimens, they're determinations. They're sending duplicates across the barrier of other people using their specimens for research. So absolutely be proud of it, write it down, talk about it in your CV. There's a question about where to find these budget templates. For both grants, as you open the Apply Now link, if you're on the website and you say apply now for research grant, it will be there as a link. You can see budget template and you will download it just there. Great question. So now I think without further ado, many questions and points will come up as we practice. So I would love to start practicing because there's nothing like that to make you think. So these are specific examples from previous applications that are obviously neutralized in the sense that you cannot see who submitted it, what organism they worked on, where they were applying from. And these are realistic examples of where we see a proposal, where we think if you just would enhance it, you would have a better chance. You sadly did not make it. You didn't succeed this round, but with little tweaking, you're nearly there. So let's practice. We're going to provide you examples, and most of these are from small collections grants, but I have added research grant examples this time. So we're going to start with objectives.
Tina,
So
before
here,
that, sorry, apologies. Before that, maybe I can share the results of the poll and we can see the points that the people wants to learn, like because everyone has actually replied. I
Great.
think many of you joined later. I couldn't see the poll, so it would be good to share the results. Let me know if you can see it now.
It didn't. Oh, yes, I saw. Yeah, hopefully this has popped out. It looks like this. It's like a pop-up window that turns up. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see the longer answers of the last
So as
question?
you scroll down, you see the different questions. 2 is English, your first language, mostly no, as is the reality. Let's remind ourselves we do belong. We may not be native speakers, but we are scientists. So you are part of the global community and maturity of it. Be proud of it. So here so most people are thinking research grants. No, we do not see the long answers, any particular.
Okay, I'll check that and come back later
Yeah,
because
we're just learning how to use these online polls. So we can do these multi-choice questions, but we're not yet sure how to do these open-ended questions. So we'll hopefully get those 8 answers. Nice, thank you, Rocio. So here we have a proposal that has set 3 objectives for themselves, and they read: review and update the taxonomic classification of vascular plants at the given, let's say, ABC herbarium, and the code. Systematize and digitize the collection. Manage records of the collection by creating a virtual herbarium. And now I'd like to ask you, how could I make this better? Can you see anything that strikes you as unnecessary, thing that doesn't work for you? So think it negatively, what's wrong? Or if you're like me, what can be better? What would you change that would be nicer, easier to read? It could be for any reason that you would think would be a better thing to do. Please provide any ideas in the chat box or raise your hand. I'll give everybody time to think for a minute as we gather our thoughts. And this is your chance to develop that critical mind of, what do I do when I read text? These could be your first draft bullet points. How do I now make it better? I like it, Elaine. Elaine in the chat box is saying maybe to provide the specific number of specimens dealing with in the project. Absolutely love it. And one way of doing it is to say, let's say with the given money, you cannot do the whole herbarium, which is a common issue, I could imagine. So you are proposing to review and update maybe the classification across the herbarium entirely, but systematize and digitize maybe only 10% of the collection. So you give it as a percentage and as the number. You give the total number, you just add numbers, you add detail. Absolutely. It's never a bad idea, I would say. Often we think there won't be space. But if you think about adding 4 digits, it's not so much. So just adding one number here and perhaps then another number, and we will find there are always ways of reducing text. There's something unnecessary here. There's perhaps repetition, unnecessary words. So absolutely consider adding those numbers, proportions, context, and taking out repetition. Love it, Elaine. Sheng Wei is suggesting creating a virtual herbarium sounds not very realistic. Better integrate the results into a database such as GBIF. Absolutely. So the logic is think about an existing place where I can contribute data to. GBIF is one. There will be others, right? This could be at national, regional level, already using the concept, an existing place where people can find my data. Contribute to something larger. Wonderful. Love it. Any other?
Yeah, something to add here is actually because now we have this new question in the application form about if you are part of a national or regional society. And in that way, if you can include something, a small like sentence in the proposal about how these new collections or how you are engaged in this network, for example, an herbarium network or this national society, that would be great as well.
Nice. As I was preparing for this workshop, I thought about these 3 general topics and then these specific ideas given this objective. So I thought about mentioning the background and importance and context of your herbarium. So as an example, one could give one of the objectives in a way that explains that context. So the herbarium ABC contains 1,000 collections of, and then you specify what. Often it's vascular plants, it could be a fungarium, it could be fossils, and it could be a combination of these from so-and-so area, from poorly collected region with only so-and-so collections available in that regional or global network of specimens, indicating how little is currently digitally available, globally visible of this very valuable area and herbarium, yet estimated to include so and so many vascular plant species, further adding context. I could say the same about vascular plants of Finland, but obviously if it isn't so rich in vascular plants, its value is different. Just to give, I'm not trying to diss Finland, I am Finnish, but I'm trying to give that perspective of if you have that card to play that you are from an area where there are many vascular plant species, but yet no collections online, use it. Say it out loud. Another perspective was to avoid repetition. And I feel here there is repetition. Reviewing and updating the taxonomic classification is the same as systematizing it. So it's a wonderful way of saying that you're updating the taxonomic classification. It's very clear, but you could then get rid of the review and the word systematize and, right? So you're getting rid of text, but still saying a meaningful thing. You're giving an example what you are going to do. It's clear to the reader. So I did feel there was space here, and digitizing and managing records to make those available is perhaps all one thing in a bullet point, just to say. A thought. Adding that detail, just what you wonderfully said, Elaine, is that adding that with numbers, proportions, always think, how can I add that detail one level more without too much space? And are you digitizing with the actual data on the label, which is digitizing, or are you also taking an image of the specimen? Digitizing can mean both. Be specific. Obviously, there is a separate box for methods, but just the thoughts, it can be helpful in using those terms, even in the objectives. I'm going to move swiftly on to another one, unless there's any hands raising. And this is again objectives, and again from small collection grants. And after this, we're going to move to an objectives in research grants. So in this example, the applicant has said, we will employ cutting-edge digitization and scanning technologies to digitize 3,000 records and scan 1,500 specimens. So we're hoping the applicant would have somewhere used space for the context. So we're assuming that, because that is clearly not available here. So that's an obvious omission. But let's assume they have used that space somewhere else. And we just considered this sentence in this example. And whilst you're thinking, I will pass the talking stick to Vinita to thank you and to enable you to say goodbye to everybody.
Sorry. Thanks, Tita. I was planning to just secretly leave.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, and good luck to everyone. If I can join in 15 minutes, I'll try. But good luck, and hopefully, like I said, I think it's supposed to, either way, you're going to learn. Those who are applying, whatever. My personal experience is the IAPT is so competitive, the grants, that it does overall improve your grant writing styles. So I think whatever you learn here will help you in other places as well. So stay positive about the outcomes. All right, thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks so much, Vinita. Have a great day. So now, any suggestions how to make this objective, this particular sentence even, better? Better to specify what is cutting-edge digitization. Yes, Cheng Wei, absolutely. Million points, and thank you for saying that. We all love using technology. It sounds impressive and saying cutting-edge technology, great, but it's empty. It doesn't mean anything. It's great in a chat over Sunday lunch or dinner with your relatives. It gives a short summary, a brief impression, but not in a proposal. Here we need detail. Maybe it can mention where is going to be available, the digital collection. Yes. So you would add it in a sentence very nicely. You say, we will do something with the particular method, in this case, cutting edge digitization replaced by the particular technology that you'd use, to digitize so and so many specimens. To do what? Fantastic. And then you add that will be added to contributed to GBIF, or whatever that sentence will be. To add it in the end of that sentence. Fantastic. Yes, you're lengthening it, but you answer all what, how, where, and where is it gonna impact. I'd like to see that. Yes. Any other points? I had thought about these points in preparing. So add detail again. So that came across in those comments. Cutting edge is not detail enough. And yes, they are answering that they would digitize. They perhaps mean digitizing by taking the label data into a digital format for these 3,000 records, and only half of them they will scan. Take an image, take a photo. They could detail what kind of scan will they use, what resolution, in a very few, like 600 pixel scan image. They could add it there, doesn't take many. But also, why would these be different? So perhaps think about, does it look logical that you're doing it in this way? Is it better to say you're going to digitize and scan 1,500 specimens, or aim for a lower number where you complete both? Might look better, more logical. And use consistent terms, records and specimens. Well, surely the 3,000 things you will digitize are the same as the 1,500 things that you scan. So use either the word specimen or records, but don't mix the terminology because it can feel confusing to the reader. I will start thinking you used it for a reason. Maybe these things are different and these things are totally something different. When actually that's just overcomplicating it. You're talking about the same thing. So make it easy for the reviewer or the reader or the feedback giver to understand what you're doing. Simply use the same term for the same thing. Any other points here? How would we want to enhance it?
It's only, yes, more about the use of consistent terminology, because sometimes specify like we're going to database this and digitize this. It's more could be more like clearer in that way. And the same with records and specimens. If you are talking the same, just use the same word. It will be more clear for us reviewing the applications to identify what you're trying to accomplish.
Nice. And now to objectives, one more, training of objectives. It's really nice to work on objectives because it really summarizes what you're trying to do. So getting these right and having them clear in your proposal is important. So here we're doing it for a research grant. And in this research grant, a person submitted 3 objectives in their proposal. They were to study the phylogenetic relationships and the evolutionary history of yellow corollas in genus ABC, determine the dominant chemicals in genus ABC, and explore the relationship between phytochemistry and phylogeny in genus ABC. So the thoughts I had are here already. I kind of forgot to hide them. But if we think about it for a little bit before starting to go in there, I'll give you time to think. So the 2 points I've made is make your objectives smaller. This sounds very grandiose. This sounds like a PhD plan and more, potentially a postdoc combined. So reduce this. This is context, but in your case, objectives has to be specific for the £2,000 from IAPT, $2,000 from IAPT. Yeah. So what can you achieve with the grant from IAPT itself? Perhaps you might want to propose to collect species K from this genus from, call it an area called Madidi Mountains, I just made that up, for which only the type collection is known, as this represents the likely second independent origin of yellow corollas in the genus, and then your objective would be to sequence this for the phylogeny. Or run phytochemical metabolomic analysis to screen chemical diversity in genus ABC. But you cannot have all of them because this is not doable within a year with $2,000. And even here, I would say these are they are less taxonomic in nature. So I would rephrase or re-emphasize that this is a taxonomic grant you're applying for. Try to think what taxonomic aspect could be this specific objective. And think about the outputs. These often go together. What could be an output from my objective? In this case, call it an estimated 20 new specimens of this genus, ABC, from the undercollected Madidi Mountains, and that you would then distribute them across 6 herbaria in 3 countries. Fantastic output. You're being specific. There's something, to hold on to, and realistic. Identification guide to all species based on flowers and vegetative characters published online using, as an example, these rapid guides. That is faster publication perhaps than a peer-reviewed publication. Something that is an output, is useful, has a taxonomic perspective. Any other thoughts on research grant objectives?
just to mention that it's good to keep this background, like the broad background in the introduction. So you will say, hey, this is my plan, my research plan for my 3 or 5 year doctoral thesis. But I need this specific funding to complete this particular objective. So the objective of this grant are this.
I like the way of phrasing it. Yeah, exactly. Just spell it out. Yeah. Introduce your PhD, be proud of it, but then explain. Any other perspectives? We are now coming to the plan example, and after that we have one on timetable and budget. James, can I ask whether you want to step in already at this point or in the later example?
Yeah, I'll do the two I did yesterday. So
Yeah, great.
the time frame and the budget, and just talk through those.
Great. So nearly ready to pass over to Stephen. I keep calling you Stephen, James. I'm so sorry, James. So example 3 is about the plan. So here we are wanting a plan of how the work plan for the small collection grants. This might be quite specific. So here we are thinking how to do it and in kind of detail in terms of methods. This is kind of the methods section of the small collections grant. So the person has explained that they're going to digitize and they're going to develop an online database. In the digitization, they say each specimen will undergo a rigorous digitization process. We will utilize state-of-the-art imaging technology to capture high-resolution photographs of specimens from multiple angles. Then they have expressed about the online database development that we are committed to developing a user-friendly online database to host the digitized collection. This database will allow researchers to access the specimens. Any thoughts of? And you might find yourself repeating the same points, how to make it better. And that's fantastic because you're learning the main points that we see time and time again. I felt as I read the rigorous process already that perhaps people will say add detail, state-of-the-art imaging technology, add detail. It's a bit vague. I did like the fact that they talk about high resolution photographs, but if you do add the detail in words, then maybe add it in a number, even more specific, even more detail. So instead of all these letters, all these characters, save it by saying the actual resolution. It'll be obvious that it is high or low or medium resolution, right? I absolutely agree with you, Shengwei. Photograph from multiple angles sounds unusual. Should explain why or consider, is that necessary? So this particular plan wasn't a three-dimensional fossil or an organism that needs photographs from multiple angles. It felt this was just added because it sounds more groovy. That's how it comes across. It felt empty. You're saying fancy words, but what is the need for this? So it felt if there is a need, and there could have been a need, but as it was not explained, I felt, does this person know what they are talking about? And it's not a nice impression to give. That's opposite of what you want the reviewer to feel like. So what you want to say, if there is a meaning to multiple angles, to say from multiple angles to capture variation in, or to capture full fruit morphology, or to capture detail of fruit morphology. Fantastic. It would take some more words, sure, but you have places to take out things. State-of-the-art imaging technology would save that space, and you add it in the multiple angles to justify. Absolutely, yeah, that think what you say is what I think what you say in terms of does it need clarification? And is it needed? Both ways. If it is needed, then it might need clarification. What I added here that I didn't mention earlier is provide examples of past successes. So if your herbarium has already digitized mention it here. So far, 819 specimens have been databased and so many mounted with the help of volunteers. And if in this project you're aiming to add 2,000 more, you can then explain in the plan that we estimate this will take 2 months based on previous success of, right? Or say that you're using a previously established protocol. If you don't have a protocol, consider going to learn that protocol from a neighboring herbarium that has digitized or scanned specimens so that you're not having to invent it from scratch. And explain who will do what and whether they need training and who those people are. Are they full-time assistants already employed by the herbarium? Or will you hire these people? Or will you work with students and volunteers who then need training, presumably by default? So then that should be in the plan. So this is a little empty in detail of who does what, because the plan should include that. And that was maybe different to the previous. And this would be similar points to think about when you make that the method section in your research grant.
Something important to add is to be humble, to be honest in this proposal as well. Like, if we cannot capture these high resolution photographs, just say our equipment only allow us to capture these photographs, but we are applying to another funding to improve our equipment or something like that. If it's true, if it's not, just say we have this technology and that's it. That's also appreciated from us.
Yeah, nobody would judge you for not having the top end equipment that costs way more than 2,000 US dollars because this is in a context. We understand that. But if the detail's missing or if you're overreaching, given your budget, that will get punished. But being humble and honest will not be punished. Like punished in the sense of like giving lower scores. It comes across as something's not right if you're promising to do this with this budget, as an example, right? Correct. I think we'll move on to the example 4, and now we're moving on to a timetable. So here's just one example of how one would do a timetable, and I will pass on to James.
Yes, I think something that's important to remember is that the planning and that is needs to be realistic. And one of the things that is being assessed with these grants is feasibility. So I think the next 2 examples feed well into feasibility or assessing feasibility. So how well have you planned and how well does your budget match your plan? So again, this speaks about being specific about things. So if you give, so the timetable that you see there is planned over 8 months, but it is a fairly high level planning that is given. So I'm sure there are many ideas, and you're welcome to put in the chat how to improve on this timetable or the planning or the time frame for the project. So the example that you see is from a small grant. And one of the things I think that is important that's perhaps missed here is that you need obviously to plan the setup, to test the setup, and also to test the quality that you are aiming for to get out of the digitization process. So one of the main things that is lost here is exactly that sort of screening process, much like in the previous example where you have to budget in for training of students or interns. You want to allow a process to be standardized so that you don't start and have to stop halfway through, but you have a working protocol. And then also matching targets and outputs to the time frame, because you want to also know how many specimens you can realistically do in the time frame that you propose, and that you will need to be quite specific about. because remember that what is important here is return on investment from IAPT. So in return on investment being outputs or impact that is made on collections, for example. So you can see the detail that's added: month 1 to 2 testing workflows, writing the final manual. So that's important in standardizing the process, producing a workflow manual that can be used then, and that can be used beyond this project, right? I think these projects help develop protocols and get processes started that can outlive the grant. So something like a manual would be very useful. And as we said, perhaps also, you can be more specific month to month. You can have a more detailed planning for every month. But of course, it's important to remember that these proposals are, say, 2 to 3 pages long. So you need to also not be repetitive in how you write, but also then be mindful how you put forward your plan and not leave any vague areas. Yeah, so I think that's it for this one, unless anyone has something to add.
Yeah, I totally agree. Any points from? If not, we'll move to the budget, and there will be a chance to keep asking questions towards the end. So we're coming very close to the end. So this is now the last example, and then we're going to wrap up and get some ideas, feedback from you. What is useful to have heard? What have you learned? And so back to James.
Yeah, so the budget, again, as I'm going to emphasize, speaks to feasibility. It also is one of the things that is scrutinized to look at the bang for buck kind of idea, what is being planned for the $2,000 budget. It's important to remember that it is in US dollars. So use a realistic conversion so that you don't end up being short of funds because of a conversion problem. But again, being specific and also being realistic in your budgeting. If you're budgeting for travel, make sure that you go and look what is the going rate for flights, for example, or for car hire, etc. Plan a realistic subsistence amount per day if you're going to travel to visit a collection, etc. So make sure that you are not overemphasizing or overestimating the budget, but you are also not selling yourself short in the budget. And for each budget item, it is good to show a qualification or qualifier of how you arrived at the total for that budget item. We all do a bit of rounding, so it's fine if you round up to the nearest dollar or $100, for example, but make sure that you can justify the actual amounts. You can see there the detail that is missing, for example, is how many people are you supporting on your budget? So the bus fare for 2 people, for example. Car hire and petrol costs, if you're going to another country, you will need to research that and make sure that you're doing that correctly. Models for cameras and things. If you are buying software, is the license valid for only a year? What are the plans beyond this budget period, for example? So as for any grant, budgets are extremely important. And that's also, Vanita mentioned, you can't start like a week before. You need to be planning this for a long time. Often when we write larger grants, and you're going to do that at some point in your career, you might budget for multiple years, for example. So it is a very, very important aspect of the project, and one that you should probably not consider only once you've written all of the things already. You should start with your objectives, your budget, so that interconnected cycle that Tina pointed out. I think it's a very important thing to consider throughout your grant writing career, right? So if there are any other ideas, those would be great of how these can be improved, or then any questions.
I think it's great, James, clarifying this part, because as Abu pointed out, people might take these suggested titles and just keep them thinking, I cannot change it. but instead, yes, we are looking for you to change these by adding that detail, specifying how many people, the fairs you've researched in these boxes here. So replacing these with more detail is what we would like to see. Nice. I don't see anything in the chat box. So we thank you for that, James. So now we're coming to the end. So we'd love to advertise our 2 more workshops closer to the deadline. This will be your chance to come with your drafts and practice more. So they will be slightly differently in content, considering the fact that by this point you're very close to the deadline. This is your chance to practice with your content, right? So do come and get constructive ideas for how to make things better. Ask questions to these. Join us in these 2 sessions towards the end of January, and by this point you'll be at the end of these steps, right? So it gives you a chance to get this in this global community. Yeah. So
Ina, do you want me to add the long answers? I could recover that from Zoom, so
yeah,
I can.
right. Absolutely. Let's add them in the chat box. So please express in the chat box now. Are there things you really enjoyed learning today? That was something you really think is useful? Equally, if there were aspects that weren't so useful, add that in the chat box. We'd love to hear. This is the first time we are organizing these, so we have a long way to go to make them even better. Any ideas of how we provide these? And if you feel safer later, you can email directly myself. I can leave my email there.
I have to make sure I just pasted the initial answers to the question what we want to have today. And now I just open the poll to have all as well, like the questions about what is your feedback or what is the most useful thing you have learned today.
Fantastic. So I can see that there's one answer that is, I would like to know if our organization is eligible to apply for the small collections grant. I hope that has been answered for that person. If not, please raise that now because we are very happy to provide help. So the short answer is you should have less than 100,000 collections and you should be listed in the Index Herbariorum. If you're not, you still have time to apply. So even though you're not listed, you could start that process now and be eligible. And the main applicant should be somewhat in charge of your herbarium, in a role that is in charge, a director, manager, to be eligible. So even though you may not be that person, you could be in touch with that person and they will submit it and you get the work ongoing if you're successful. That's fantastic that we have gone through these common pitfalls and the process strategies as well. So if you're a visual person, then some things work better. And I would really encourage writing an email to yourself. That's my absolute favorite. Writing those bullet points, making a PowerPoint slide, even to myself. I think, I'm going to have a meeting with myself tomorrow. I need to present the slide and tell myself what this grant is about. It could be anything like that. Some people are more visual, some people are just bullet points. Always use your actual creativity thinking on a paper. That's my one thing I do want to mention. In digital world as we live, not everything happens on a computer. So I'm enjoying reading these points you've expressed that you wanted to learn. I'm feeling many of them, hopefully we have answered. And if so, please express that now. That helps us to make these things work. So for those who wanted to learn about the typical research projects, what they contain, I would guide you to that link online on the website that gives you previously awarded grants. That's the best way. So they're very broad mix, but that is a nice way of getting an impression. We did not provide that here. But again, think about taxonomy. Taxonomy at its core. And if you want to have help in making that small collections grant application, this is it. Turn up in January again in those 2 sessions, and that help is going to be there. And by that point, you might have been able to use some of the approaches we've provided today and check against your proposal and the common mistakes and go, okay, nice, I can enhance that a bit. Then turn up in January and we'll keep doing that. And that's how it works.
Yeah.
Step by step, it gets better. Yeah, please, if Roland if you wanted to say, please.
No, I just answer. I'm sorry. I just answered.
So are we getting answers to that final poll?
Yes, I closed it in less than 1 minute so we can see the answers.
Great. Elaine has asked, I have one additional question. How many proposals could one collection submit for the small collection grants? Interesting. So I would think it would, there is no official limit, right? So if the same small collections, call it a herbarium code, if the same herbarium code wants to apply for two distinctive, two separate proposals in the same round, you would really have to, yeah, justify how they're not. Yeah, I guess you could. The same, there is no limit. So yeah, you can. I've never seen that. So I can't give guidance of previous, but I guess you'd want to express you have submitted to this specific proposal is for this, and that they're independent enough. They couldn't rely on each other because one may not get funded, right? So my advice would be make them standalone, independent. If one doesn't work, express that you have submitted to in both proposals, that it's clear that people don't confuse, I suppose, but they are independent. Anybody advise on that? Who's still present? Yes. A great point from James. Be mindful of how much you commit to if both would come through. Are you able to? If you have been successful in the past, maybe that would be something I'd advise, like go ahead and try. But if you haven't applied before, maybe focus on one proposal, do it well, and then next year submit another one would be a better strategy. I'm going to press share results and see if that it only says how many people. So we know that 10 people have answered, and now they're in the chat box. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I know it's a long stint. We're now coming to the 2-hour mark. So thank you for fantastic 2 hours with you. Any final comments from anybody before I close our session? Thank you absolutely so much. And thank you for everybody who's helped to prepare and run today. It has taken us our time too, so I really appreciate it. It's been a great thing to do it together. This will be available online, so do share that with your colleagues who haven't made it into these 2 workshops. It really does make a difference in people preparing proposals, so hopefully it will help to make them take that extra step and be successful. Thank you so much. Have great